The attic smelled like dust and forgotten time. Elias Brennan stood on creaking floorboards in his grandfather's South Boston house, surrounded by cardboard boxes holding 70 years of accumulated memories. November rain drummed against the roof. 3 months had passed since the funeral. 3 months since he watched them fold the flag and hand it to his grandmother with those careful, rehearsed movements that somehow made grief feel official. He was 28 years old, an Army Ranger. 2 tours in Afghanistan behind him, and another deployment coming in January. He knew how to clear rooms and call in airstrikes and keep his heart rate steady while insurgents fired AK rounds through mud brick walls. But standing in this attic, surrounded by his grandfather's silence, he felt like a child again. The trunk sat in the corner beneath a window. Dark wood. Brass corners gone green with age. No lock, just a leather strap buckled tight. Elias knelt and unbuckled it. Inside, wrapped in oil-stained canvas that smelled like gun solvent and old wool, he found an M1 Garand rifle. The woodstock was scarred. The metal showed wear in 1,000 small places where hands had gripped it and weather had tested it. But someone had maintained this weapon with obsessive care. Every surface gleamed with preservation oil, and over the muzzle, stretched tight like a second skin, was an olive-drab wool sock. Elias lifted the rifle, turned it in the weak attic light. The sock was old, threadbare in places, stained dark with something that might have been oil or might have been something else. He could see where it had been pulled tight over the barrel and tied off with bootlace. Beneath the rifle lay a journal, leather-bound, pages yellowed. His grandfather's handwriting filled every line in that precise engineer's script that turned even grocery lists into technical documents. Elias opened to the first page. October 20th, 1944. Hürtgen Forest, Germany. 12 men entered. 2 men returned. Sound killed the others. I will never forgive myself for being too loud. He turned the page. November 14th, 1944. Day 1. 8 sentries eliminated. 0 alarms raised. The sock works. Leopold was right. Silence saves lives. Another page. November 15th, 1944. Day 2. 11 more. The Germans are calling us ghosts. They do not understand how we kill without sound. Good. Let them be afraid of the dark. Elias flipped through the journal. Every page detailed another kill, another mission, another night of silence. The entries were clinical. Distances, wind conditions, shot placement. But between the technical details, his grandfather's guilt bled through in small confessions. I see Matthias every time I close my eyes, hear him saying it was too loud, wonder if there was another way, a quieter way, a way that whispered instead of screamed. The final entry was dated November 19th, 1944. Total confirmed 97. 6 days. God help me. I became very good at killing men who never heard me coming. Leopold's invention worked. His son's question was answered. But the cost of that answer weighs on me more with each passing year. Elias sat back on his heels. Outside, the rain intensified. Thunder rolled across the November sky like artillery in the distance. His grandfather had never spoken about the war, not once. Family dinners would circle around it carefully. His father would ask questions. His grandmother would change the subject. And Nathaniel Brennan would sit at the head of the table, quiet and distant present, but unreachable. Now Elias understood why. He lifted the rifle again, studied that olive-drab sock stretched over the muzzle, tried to imagine what desperation or inspiration or both had led someone to think this might work, to believe that a 50-cent piece of wool could change how wars were fought. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory from that final hospital visit. Morphine soft but urgent. The attic, Elias. Remember to check the attic. Now he understood what the old man had been trying to say, what secret he had carried for 65 years, what truth he needed someone to find after he was gone. Elias closed the journal, rewrapped the rifle, and as the rain hammered the roof above him, he made a decision. This story deserved to be told. This weapon deserved to be understood. And the men who had died because of sound, and the men who had lived because of silence deserved to be remembered. But first he needed to understand where it had all begun. October 20th, 1944. The night, everything changed. The night sound became the enemy. The German ammunition depot sat in a clearing 3 miles behind enemy lines. Captain Nathaniel Brennan could smell it before he saw it. That distinctive scent of gun oil and explosives and diesel fuel that marked every Wehrmacht supply point from Normandy to the Siegfried Line. He lay in wet grass at the forest edge. 40 pounds of gear pressed him into the mud. His M1 Garand rifle felt heavier than it should. Rain had soaked through his uniform hours ago. Now the cold had worked its way into his bones and settled there like an occupying force. Behind him, 11 men waited in the darkness. The best soldiers the Office of Strategic Services could spare for a mission everyone knew was suicide. They had infiltrated German lines at dusk, crossed 3 miles of forest without a sound, and now, at 0300 hours on a moonless October night, they crouched at the edge of a clearing that held enough ammunition to supply a German division for a month. Their orders were simple: plant explosives, destroy the depot, disappear before dawn. Brennan was 32 years old, a civil engineer from Boston who had spent peacetime designing bridges and calculating load weights. Now he calculated kill zones and approach vectors and tried not to think about how he had gotten from drafting tables to German forests, from blueprints to blood. He signaled his team forward with 2 fingers. They moved like shadows. 12 ghosts crossing open ground toward a fence that separated them from their target and from any chance of survival if this went wrong. Matthias Hale moved up beside him. Best friend since basic training, a logger's son from Oregon who could move through forest like he was part of it. They had survived North Africa together. Sicily. Normandy. Now they lay side by side in German mud, and Hale's breathing was steady as bedrock. "Sentry," Hale whispered. 11 o'clock. 40 yards. Brennan saw him. Young German soldier, maybe 20, standing guard beside the main warehouse entrance, smoking a cigarette. The orange glow marked his position like a beacon. The barracks sat 50 yards beyond the sentry. Brennan could see light in some windows, could hear the faint sound of men sleeping, snoring, breathing, living their last moments of peace before American explosives turned their world into fire. The sentry had to die quietly, before he could raise an alarm. Brennan considered the knife on his belt, but 40 yards was too far. The ground between them was gravel that would crunch like broken glass under boot leather. Knife work required close distance, required silence in your approach and certainty in your strike. He raised his M1 Garand instead, centered the iron sights on the sentry's chest. His finger found the trigger. Familiar weight, familiar pressure. He thought about his father for half a second. Ezra Brennan, coal miner in West Virginia. A man who had taught his son that every bullet counted because poverty meant you could not afford to miss. 1 round, 1 deer, Nate. Make it count. Make it clean. Brennan squeezed the trigger. The M1 Garand barked like thunder in a cathedral. The muzzle flash lit up the night. The report echoed off every building in the compound and rolled across the forest behind them and announced to every German within half a mile that Americans were here and armed and dangerous. The sentry fell. Center mass hit. Dead before his body knew it. But the damage was done. The barracks exploded with light and noise, windows filled with silhouettes, doors slammed open. German soldiers poured out in various states of dress, some still pulling on boots, others already firing into the darkness with machine pistols that carved up the night with muzzle flash and tracer rounds. Brennan's team tried to retreat, tried to reach the forest, but they were caught in the open with no cover and no time. The firefight lasted less than 3 minutes. That was enough. 40 German soldiers with machine guns massacred 11 Americans with rifles. Brennan ran, dragged his wounded radio operator through the fence gap. Behind him, his men were dying. He could hear Matthias Hale screaming. That sound would live in his nightmares forever. The way Hale's voice went from words to just raw noise as bullets stitched across his back. Hale fell into Brennan's arms. Blood bubbled from his lips. His eyes were already going distant, but he managed to speak. 3 words that would haunt Nathaniel Brennan for the rest of his life. "Too loud, Nate." Simple observation, simple truth. They all heard. Sound killed us. Then Matthias Hale died. His eyes went empty while German guns continued their chorus behind them. And Brennan understood that he had made the worst decision of his military career, had chosen the wrong tool for the job, had fired a weapon that screamed when he needed one that whispered. He and the radio operator were the only survivors. 2 men out of 12, running through German forest while their friends died because of noise, because sound traveled 50 yards in less than a second, because a rifle shot in the night was a death sentence for everyone who heard it. Brennan carried Hale's words with him through the forest, carried them back across German lines, carried them into the debriefing room where officers wanted to know what went wrong and why only 2 men came back and how a simple mission had turned into a bloodbath. He told them the truth. We were too loud. I was too loud. The mission failed because of sound. 14 days later, Brennan sat in a cramped office at OSS headquarters in London. His right arm was in a sling from a bullet that had grazed his shoulder during the escape. The physical wound was healing. The other one kept bleeding. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Matthias Hale's face, heard that accusation disguised as observation. Too loud. Major Richard Thornton entered the room, British Special Operations Executive, 42 years old, with grey temples and the bearing of a man who had watched too many young soldiers die for preventable reasons. He carried a folder thick with reports and photographs that told stories no one wanted to hear. He sat across from Brennan without preamble. "You are not the first, and unless something changes, you will not be the last." He spread photographs across the desk. Each one showed the aftermath of failed missions. British commandos dead in German compounds. French resistance fighters executed after botched assassinations. American intelligence officers killed during what should have been silent infiltrations. Every photograph told the same story. Loud weapons, alerted enemies, unnecessary death. "We call it the noise gap problem," Thornton continued. "The distance at which a knife becomes too risky but a gun is too loud, roughly 30 to 80 yards depending on conditions. At that range, a man with a standard rifle might as well be firing a cannon. The sound carries, the enemy responds. Good men die." Brennan studied the photographs with his engineer's mind, saw patterns, saw problems that demanded solutions. "Have you tried suppressors?" "Of course. We have put every type of muffler and baffle system on every gun in our arsenal." Thornton pulled out a physics diagram. "A standard M1 Garand fires a .30 caliber bullet at approximately 2,400 feet per second. That is nearly twice the speed of sound. When the bullet breaks the sound barrier, it creates a sonic boom, a crack that no amount of metal tubing can silence. The bullet arrives at its target, announcing itself with a sound that alerts every enemy within 400 yards. Brennan felt something click in his mind. That same sensation he used to get solving difficult engineering problems back when his biggest concern was whether a bridge design would pass inspection. So the issue is not the explosion of the gunpowder, it is the speed of the projectile. Precisely, we need a bullet that refuses to break the speed limit, one that travels subsonic, below the sound barrier. But such a bullet must still carry enough energy to kill a man reliably at 50 yards. Every military engineer we have consulted says it cannot be done. The mathematics do not allow for both silence and lethality." Thornton paused. "Let that sink in. But there is someone I want you to meet. A man who has made a career of solving problems everyone else says are impossible. A man who lost his son to the same issue that killed your friend. And a man who has been working obsessively for nearly a year to answer a simple question." "What question?" "Why can nobody make guns quieter?" Leopold Ashford's workshop sat in the basement of a building that had been bombed twice and rebuilt once. Brennan followed Thornton down stairs that creaked under their weight. The smell of gun oil and metal shavings grew stronger with each step. At the bottom, surrounded by workbenches covered in disassembled weapons and hand tools, stood a man who looked more like a schoolteacher than someone who could change the course of a war. Ashford was 57 years old, lean and grey-haired, with oil stains on his shirt and reading glasses perched on his nose. He looked up from a weapon he was modifying and studied Brennan with eyes that held deep, barely controlled grief. "You lost men," he said. "It was not a question. Major Thornton would not have brought you here if you had not." 11, Brennan replied quietly. 11 men died because I fired a gun that was too loud." Ashford nodded slowly, set down his tools with careful precision. "My son Owen was an OSS officer. He died in North Africa last year during a raid on a German communications post." He walked to a workbench and picked up a framed photograph, a young man in an American uniform, smiling the way young men smile before they learn what war really means. Ashford stared at the photo as he spoke, talking to his dead son more than to Brennan. "Owen wrote something in his last letter. He asked me a question I could not stop thinking about. Dad, you spent your whole career making moonshine stills silent in Kentucky. You designed exhaust systems that turned roar into whisper so the revenue agents could not find us. Why can nobody make guns quieter?" He set down the photograph with the same careful precision he had used with his tools. "That question haunted me for months after Owen died. It kept me awake at night. I could not function, could not work, could not focus on anything except my boy's question." His voice grew harder, more determined. "Finally, in January of this year, I could not bear it anymore. I sold my property in Kentucky, sold everything I owned except Owen's photograph and his letters. I came to London with one purpose, to answer my son's question." He picked up what looked like an M1 Garand, that had been modified in ways that violated every principle Brennan understood about firearms. I have been working 16-hour days for 10 months, failing, trying again, testing theories, starting over, not for the military, not for victory, not for recognition. He looked at Owen's photograph again. For my boy, so that his death might save other sons, so that other fathers will not have to sell everything and move across an ocean just to make their child's death mean something. Brennan felt the weight of that confession settle over the room like smoke. Ashford handed him something. Not a complex weapon, not an engineered marvel, an olive-drab wool sock. The military experts told me I was insane, Ashford said. They told me you cannot silence a rifle, that it defies physics. They were right. You cannot silence a rifle bullet traveling at twice the speed of sound. He picked up a small glass jar filled with dark liquid, gun oil. But you can do something simpler, something so obvious that every expert missed it because they were too busy trying to build complex solutions. He pulled the sock over the muzzle of his M1 Garand, stretched it tight, tied it off with bootlace. Then he soaked a rag in gun oil and stuffed it into the sock. Wool fibers trap expanding gases, create turbulence, slow the escape of pressure. The oil-soaked rag absorbs the muzzle blast, cools the gases before they hit open air. It is not silent, but it is quiet enough. He led Brennan to a small indoor range, really just a long corridor with sandbags at one end and a target 50 yards away. Load your rifle, aim at the target, then fire it normally so you understand the baseline. Brennan loaded a round, aimed, fired. The M1 Garand roared. The report was deafening in the enclosed space. His ears rang. The muzzle flash lit up the corridor like lightning. Upstairs he could hear voices react to the noise, officers shouting, footsteps running. Now try mine. Ashford handed him the sock-wrapped rifle. Brennan settled it against his shoulder. The front end felt slightly heavier. The balance was different, but the mechanics were familiar. He aimed at the same target, squeezed the trigger. The sound was unlike anything Brennan had ever heard from a firearm. There was no sharp crack, no explosive report. Instead, the weapon made a sound like someone dropping a thick book on a carpeted floor, a suppressed cough accompanied by a soft hiss of escaping gas. Downrange, the target shuddered as the bullet punched through center mass. Upstairs, the voices continued their conversation. No one reacted. No one came running. No one had heard anything that sounded like danger. Brennan lowered the rifle, stared at it, looked at Ashford. How much noise reduction? We measured it at the British testing ground. Standard M1. Garand produces approximately 156 decibels. That is louder than a jet engine at takeoff. With the sock and rag system, we recorded 95 decibels, about the same as a lawnmower. Still loud if you are standing next to it, but at 50 yards through building walls with men sleeping. Ashford smiled without humor. They do not wake up. How long does it last? The wool starts to burn through after about 10 shots. The rag needs replacing after 5 or 6. But for elimination of sentries, for silent infiltration, it changes everything. Brennan thought about Matthias Hale, about 11 men who died because a rifle shot echoed 50 yards and woke sleeping Germans, about all the missions that had failed because loud weapons announced American presence before the job was done. Does it affect accuracy? The sock adds about 0.3 pounds to the muzzle, creates very slight barrel drop. You need to aim maybe 2 inches higher at 50 yards. The oil-soaked rag actually improves accuracy slightly by dampening barrel vibration. I have tested it extensively. It works, Captain Brennan. It works better than anything the military has tried, and it costs 50 cents in materials that any soldier can acquire. Thornton spoke from behind them. We have approval for a field test. 6 days, single operation, Hurtgen Forest. If this works in combat conditions, we expand deployment. If it fails, we bury the idea and never speak of it again. He looked at Brennan directly. I need someone who understands what is at stake. Someone who lost men to the noise gap problem. Someone who will use this weapon the way it was meant to be used. Not as a toy, not as an experiment, but as a tool to save lives by taking them quietly. Brennan held the sock-wrapped rifle, felt its weight, thought about Hale's last words, too loud. He thought about his father, Ezra Brennan, teaching him to hunt in West Virginia hills. 1 round, 1 deer. Silence keeps you alive, son. The mine and the woods both punish noise. He thought about Owen Ashford, asking a simple question that no one had bothered to answer until grief made it impossible to ignore. When do we deploy? November 14th. You will have 8 men, all veterans, All volunteers. Your mission is to eliminate enemy sentries and officers across a 6-day operation in the Hurtgen Forest sector. Prove that silence is more effective than firepower. Show us that a 50-cent sock can change how we fight. Ashford's voice was quiet when he spoke. Bring them home, Captain. All of them. Make my son's question mean something. Make those 11 men you lost die for a reason. Prove that we can be smarter about how we kill, that we can whisper instead of scream. Brennan looked at Owen Ashford's photograph on the workbench, looked at the sock-wrapped rifle in his hands, made a decision that would define the rest of his life. I will make it mean something. I promise you that. November 14th was 3 weeks away. 3 weeks to train, 3 weeks to prepare, 3 weeks until Nathaniel Brennan would learn whether silence could truly save lives, or whether it would just make death arrive without warning. The Hurtgen Forest in November was a graveyard that refused to stay quiet. Artillery had reduced ancient firs to skeletal fingers clawing at grey skies. Machine gun fire had carved the landscape into killing zones measured in yards instead of miles. The ground was frozen mud mixed with pine needles and the shattered equipment of men who had died trying to take these same hills weeks before. Captain Nathaniel Brennan moved through this wasteland like smoke given purpose. His 8-man team had crossed into German territory at dusk on November 13th. They spent the night in a drainage ditch half filled with ice water that numbed their legs and tested their resolve. Now, at 0400 hours on November 14th, they crouched at the forest edge watching a German command bunker complex wake to another day of war. Brennan checked his M1 Garand one final time. The olive-drab sock stretched tight over the muzzle looked absurd in the pre-dawn light, like a child's attempt at camouflage. But he had test-fired this configuration 47 times over 3 weeks. Had learned to trust the physics, even when his eyes told him it looked ridiculous. Corporal Vincent Hayes lay beside him, farm boy from Iowa who could shoot quail on the wing at 60 yards. Next to Hayes was Private First Class Jackson Moore, Tennessee whiskey runner's son who moved through forest like he was born to it. The rest of the team spread in a loose line. 8 shadows waiting for their captain to commit them to something that would either validate Leopold Ashford's invention or prove that desperate fathers sometimes build weapons out of grief instead of engineering. The German sentry stood guard beside the bunker entrance, young, maybe 20, smoking a cigarette and stamping his feet against the cold. The barracks sat 40 yards beyond him, close enough that a standard rifle shot would wake every sleeping soldier inside. Close enough that noise meant death for everyone wearing an American uniform. Brennan raised the sock-wrapped M1, settled it against his shoulder. The front end felt heavier than it should. The balance was wrong in ways that violated 3 years of muscle memory. But he had learned to compensate, had practiced until the wrongness became familiar. He found the sentry through his iron sights, elevated his aim 2 inches to account for the sock weight. Thought about Matthias Hale dying in his arms saying it was too loud. Thought about 11 men who never came home because sound travelled faster than good intentions. He squeezed the trigger. The rifle produced a sound like a book dropping on carpet, a suppressed cough, a whisper of mechanical violence that died before it could travel more than a few yards. The recoil was gentle, almost apologetic. 50 yards away, the German sentry stumbled. The .30 caliber round hit him below the collarbone with enough force to stop his heart mid-beat. He fell backward onto frozen ground. His cigarette tumbled from nerveless fingers and glowed on the dirt beside his body. Silence. Brennan counted seconds while his heart hammered against his ribs. 5, 10, 15. The barracks windows stayed dark. A German soldier coughed in his sleep and rolled over but did not wake. The world continued turning as if a man had not just died without announcement. Hayes whispered beside him, voice tight with something between awe and horror. Jesus Christ, that was quieter than a prayer in church. Brennan worked the bolt. The mechanical clack of brass ejecting was louder than the shot itself. He caught the spent casing before it could hit ground, pocketed it, chambered a fresh round. 7 more sentries between us and the objective. Move fast, move quiet. If anyone raises an alarm, we abort and run. They ghosted across the clearing, stepped over the dead German who would never know what killed him, reached the bunker network, and began the systematic elimination of every guard who stood between them and the explosive charges they needed to plant. Brennan took the second sentry at 45 yards. The man was relieving himself against a tree, died before he could finish, just collapsed midstream with a bullet through his spine. Hayes eliminated the third, a roving patrol guard who fell without making a sound louder than his body hitting mud. Moore got the 4th and 5th, 2 sentries standing together sharing a cigarette and complaining about the cold in whispered German. Both fell within seconds of each other, Their cigarettes continued glowing on the ground like funeral candles marking where they died. By 0530 hours, 8 German sentries were dead, 0 alarms raised. The barracks maintained their chorus of snoring and restless sleep, and Brennan's team planted charges on 3 command bunkers that would detonate 15 minutes after they reached minimum safe distance. They melted back into the forest as dawn broke grey and cold. Behind them, the explosives turned night into brief day. German soldiers poured from barracks in confusion, but by then the Americans were ghosts again. Shadows that had killed 8 men and disappeared without leaving evidence beyond cooling bodies, and the question of how sentries died without waking anyone. Day 1 complete. 8 confirmed kills, 0 American casualties. The sock worked. November 15th brought freezing rain that turned the forest floor into a skating rink of ice over mud. Visibility dropped to 30 yards through curtains of sleet. Brennan's team moved through the storm like they were part of it. Their mission had expanded based on first-day success. No longer just bunker networks. Now they hunted any German sentry or officer they could reach without raising alarms. Brennan eliminated his first target at 0600 hours. A lieutenant stepping outside an officer's bunker to smoke in the rain. The suppressed round took him through the chest at 50 yards. He fell into mud beside his door. Inside, other officers continued their breakfast meeting. Never knew their second-in-command had just died 10 feet away. Hayes took a sentry at 0900. Moore got a roving patrol at 11:30. By noon, 5 more Germans had fallen to suppressed fire. Each death was surgical, precise, and completely inaudible to anyone more than 20 yards distant. But in a Wehrmacht headquarters building 6 miles behind the front lines, someone was starting to notice a pattern. Captain Klaus Richter was 48 years old, an intelligence officer who had survived the Russian front by being more intelligent than the men trying to kill him. He stood in his office studying reports that made no tactical sense. 9 sentries dead across 2 days, no shell casings recovered, no witnesses to gunfire, guards dying within yards of other soldiers who heard nothing. The bodies showed heavy caliber wounds, probably American 30-06, but the damage patterns were strange. Bullets that hit hard but seemed to have lost velocity, as if they had travelled through something that slowed them down. Richter lit a cigarette and studied a map of the sector, marked each death with a red pin, saw a pattern emerge. The Americans were working their way through command infrastructure, targeting sentries near headquarters, officers near communications bunkers, anyone whose death would create gaps in defensive coverage. This was not random violence. This was surgical warfare. He picked up his telephone, called the garrison commander. "I need authorization to set a trap. The Americans have developed some new method of silent elimination. I intend to capture one of them alive and discover what they are using." Authorization came within the hour. Richter began planning an ambush that would either capture American ghosts or prove that his paranoia had finally exceeded his intelligence. By nightfall on November the 15th, Brennan's team had added 11 more kills to their count. Officers leaving headquarters, guards manning checkpoints, a radio operator smoking outside a communications bunker who died so quietly that the Morse code operator inside never stopped transmitting. The running total reached 19 confirmed kills across 2 days. That night, huddled in a hide position while freezing rain drummed on their shelter, Half Brennan cleaned his rifle with obsessive care. The sock was showing wear. Powder residue had stained the wool nearly black. The fabric felt hot, even in November cold. But it still functioned, still turned his rifle into something that whispered death. Moore spoke from the darkness beside him. "Captain, we are making them afraid. I heard German voices on patrol today. They were talking about ghosts, about sentries dying without sound. They think we are demons or some kind of American black magic." "Good," Brennan replied. "Fear makes mistakes. Mistakes create opportunities." But he thought about those 19 dead Germans, thought about faces he had seen through his sights in the half-second before pulling the trigger. Young faces, mostly. Kids who had probably been drafted and sent to this frozen hell without understanding why. Now they were dead, because Brennan had a sock on his rifle, and Leopold Ashford's son had asked a question about making guns quieter. He wondered if this was what innovation felt like, if every leap forward in human ingenuity came with a body count that made you question whether progress was worth the cost. Hayes interrupted his thoughts. "Movement on the perimeter. Single contact. Looks like a runner carrying dispatches." Brennan moved to observation position. Saw a German soldier jogging through the forest. Alone. Unarmed except for a sidearm. Probably carrying orders from one command post to another. An easy kill. Target of opportunity. He raised his rifle. Aimed. His finger found the trigger and stopped. This soldier was not a sentry whose death served tactical purpose, not an officer whose elimination disrupted command structure, just a messenger doing his job. Killing him would add one more number to the count, but accomplish nothing except making Brennan feel like he was shooting men for sport instead of strategy. He lowered the rifle. Let him pass. The team looked at him with confusion, but they held fire. Watched the German runner disappear into the forest carrying his dispatches to wherever they were meant to go. It was a small choice, meaningless in the scope of a war that measured deaths in millions. But Brennan needed to know he still could make that choice, that the sock on his rifle had not turned him into a machine that killed anything that moved. November 16th brought worse weather, sleet mixed with snow. Visibility sometimes dropped to 15 yards. But that worked in their favor. Brennan could approach closer now, could ensure hits even with the muzzle drop caused by sock weight. He killed a German captain at 0700 hours. The man was drinking coffee outside headquarters, 60 yards through driving sleet. Brennan compensated for wind, for distance, for the slight pull to the left caused by wool on his barrel. Fired. The captain dropped his cup and fell beside it. Inside the building, staff officers continued their morning briefing. Never paused. Hayes got a supply sergeant at noon. Moore eliminated a machine gun team leader at 1400. Throughout the afternoon, the team worked their way through German positions. A communications officer, 2 sentries at a fuel depot, an artillery spotter, each kill adding to the count. By the time they withdrew to their hide position on November 16th night, 7 more Germans were dead. The 3-day total reached 26 confirmed kills, and somewhere in the sleet and darkness Klaus Richter was putting his trap into motion. November 17th at 0300 hours. Brennan led his team toward what intelligence called a lightly defended supply depot. Easy target, standard approach, eliminate the sentries, plant charges, disappear before dawn. They reached the perimeter at 0345. Brennan spotted the first sentry at 40 yards. Young soldier standing in freezing rain and looking miserable. Standard setup, standard kill. Brennan raised his rifle, settled the sock-wrapped muzzle, aimed, prepared to fire. 30 German soldiers rose from concealed positions in the forest around them. The trap sprung with perfect timing. Richter had anticipated the approach vector, had positioned men in a semicircle, had used a sentry as bait, and he had waited with the patience of a hunter who understood his prey would come. Muzzle flash turned night into strobing chaos. Tracer rounds drew red lines through the darkness. Brennan's team scattered as bullets chewed up frozen ground and shattered tree bark. Hayes went down immediately, bullet through his thigh. He screamed once, then bit it back to silence. Moore returned fire, but the Germans had them surrounded on 3 sides. The sock-wrapped rifles were useless in sustained combat. Bolt action against automatic weapons was mathematics that favored the enemy. Private William Davidson took a burst across his chest, fell without a sound except body hitting dirt. Corporal Samuel Miller caught rounds through his throat and shoulder. Went down making sounds that would haunt Brennan's nightmares.
"Fall back!" Brennan roared. "Everyone fall back now!"
He grabbed Hayes, dragged him toward the forest edge. Moore and 3 others laid covering fire. Not suppressed fire, just standard M1 Garand shots that cracked like thunder and announced their position, but bought seconds of survival. They ran. Left Davidson and Miller in the mud because staying meant dying beside them. Richter's soldiers pursued, but not with enthusiasm. They had achieved their objective, had proven the American ghosts were human, had drawn blood. Brennan and 5 survivors reached their fallback position at dawn. 2 men wounded, 2 men dead, and Brennan's shoulder bleeding from a grazing shot he had not even felt during the chaos. The kill count had increased by 1, 27 total across 4 days. But the cost was 2 good men, and now the Germans knew the ghosts existed, knew they could be hurt, knew they were not demons, but soldiers who bled red when bullets found them. The hunter had become the hunted. November 18th. Brennan sat in a freezing hide position with his arm bandaged and his team reduced to 6 effectives. Hayes could still shoot despite his wounded leg, but they had lost their best close-quarters man and their most experienced demolitions expert. The mission parameters demanded completion. 6 days. Prove the sock method works. Get everyone home alive. That afternoon, radio intelligence intercepted German communications. A massive supply convoy would move through their sector at 2200 hours. 60 trucks, 300 guards, ammunition, fuel and equipment for 2 full divisions. The single largest German logistics movement in the sector for months. The tactical officer on the radio wanted to call in artillery, level the whole convoy. But Brennan looked at his sock-wrapped rifle and thought about Davidson and Miller dying in the mud. Thought about Matthias Hale's last words. Thought about Leopold Ashford's son asking why guns could not be quieter. He made a decision that his team thought was insane. "We take the convoy. Silent elimination of command structure. Make them abandon the trucks without ever knowing what hit them." 6 men against 300. But Brennan understood something the Germans did not. Fear was not about numbers. It was about dying without understanding why. About guards collapsing without sound. About officers falling without warning. About the creeping certainty that death was hunting you and you could not hear it coming. The convoy appeared at 22:15 hours. 60 trucks grinding through mud on a forest road, guards walking alongside in the freezing rain, officers riding in lead vehicles, a mobile target that would take 30 minutes to pass their position. Brennan had positioned his team in 3 two-man elements along 400 yards of road. Each element had clear fields of fire. Each had designated targets. Officers first, then senior sergeants, then anyone who tried to rally the others. He fired first. The lead truck's driver slumped over his wheel. The truck drifted left into a drainage ditch. Stopped. The convoy halted behind it. Confusion rippled down the line like electricity through water. A German colonel jumped from the second truck, started shouting orders, trying to understand why the lead vehicle had stopped. Brennan's second shot took him through the chest at 70 yards. The colonel fell. His orders died with him. The soldiers looked at their fallen commander and did not understand what had killed him. Moore eliminated a major, then 2 captains. Hayes' wounded leg and all took out the senior sergeant who was trying to organize a defensive perimeter. Panic began to spread like disease. The Germans were taking casualties but could not identify the source, could not hear gunshots, could not see muzzle flash, just men falling, officers dying, leadership disappearing into death without announcement or explanation. A young lieutenant screamed orders to form defensive positions. Brennan shot him through the forehead. The lieutenant's body fell and his words died, and the soldiers looked at each other with growing terror because their chain of command was being systematically destroyed by ghosts they could not fight. For 8 hours, Brennan's team worked through that convoy like surgeons cutting away diseased tissue. Officers first, then senior NCOs, then junior officers who tried to assume command, then anyone wearing rank insignia, then machine gun crews, then radio operators. The kill count climbed with mechanical efficiency. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, each death silent, each creating more confusion, more fear, more certainty that something supernatural was hunting them. German soldiers began firing at shadows, at each other, at nothing. Their muzzle flashes lit up the night and revealed their positions but did nothing to stop the invisible killers systematically destroying their leadership. At 0600 hours, with dawn breaking grey and cold, the survivors broke. 300 German soldiers reduced to a terrified mob. They abandoned 60 trucks full of ammunition and fuel, left their dead officers scattered like autumn leaves, fled into the forest screaming about demons and American witchcraft and death that came without sound. They left their courage in the mud because courage only works when you understand what you are fighting. At dawn, Brennan's team moved through the abandoned convoy, placed thermite grenades on fuel trucks, destroyed ammunition that would have supplied 2 German divisions for months, and they did it all without losing a single additional man. Brennan counted the bodies as they worked, officers and senior NCOs mostly, men whose deaths had broken the convoy's will to fight. 68 Germans dead in 8 hours, killed by 6 Americans with sock-wrapped rifles. The count now stood at 95 confirmed kills over 5 days. November 19th, the final day. Extraction scheduled for 1400 hours, just 8 more hours in German territory. Then they could disappear into American lines and sleep for a week and try to forget the faces of 95 men who had died without hearing death approach. But intelligence had one last target. Klaus Richter's headquarters, a farmhouse fortified with sandbags and machine gun nests. The intelligence officer who had set the trap, who had killed Davidson and Miller, who understood that Americans had developed something new and dangerous. Brennan studied the farmhouse through field glasses, knew this was suicide, knew he should walk away, but also knew that letting Richter live meant other American teams would eventually face someone who understood silence could be a weapon. He left his team in the forest, went alone, because if this went wrong, 5 men should not die for his vendetta. The approach took 4 hours, crawling through frozen mud 3 feet at a time, stopping for 5 minutes between movements, breathing shallow, heart rate controlled, every lesson his father Ezra had taught him about patience in the hunt, about silence in the woods, about waiting for the perfect moment to take the shot that mattered. He reached a position 40 yards from the farmhouse, saw Richter through a window. The German captain was studying maps, drinking coffee, looking tired but determined. a professional soldier doing his job with competence and dedication. Brennan raised his rifle. The sock was barely holding together. 5 days of hard use had burned holes through the wool, but it would last for one more shot. Had to last. He aimed at Richter's chest. Center mass. The kill shot Leopold Ashford's sock was designed to deliver. His finger found the trigger, applied pressure, and stopped. In that frozen moment, Brennan thought about 95 dead Germans, about faces seen through rifle sights in the half-second before pulling the trigger, about young soldiers who probably had families wondering if they would come home, about the weight of making killing too efficient, too easy, too mechanical. Richter was not a sentry, not a random target. He was a worthy opponent who had earned respect through intelligence and skill, a hunter who had almost caught Brennan's team, a soldier doing his duty with honor. Brennan shifted his aim 6 inches right. Fired. The bullet hit Richter's shoulder, spun him like a top, knocked him down. A disabling wound, but not lethal. Proof that Brennan still had the capacity to choose. Still could decide when death was necessary and when mercy meant more than another body on the count. He worked the bolt one final time, chambered his last round, but he did not fire it. Instead, he withdrew. Melted into forest while German soldiers rushed to help their wounded captain. At 1400 hours, Brennan and his team crossed into American lines. Muddy, exhausted, alive. The final count stood at 96 kills across 6 days, 26 sentries and officers, 68 convoy personnel, 1 wounded German intelligence officer, 1 messenger spared, plus 1 more that Brennan had not counted. The sentry from day one whose death had started everything. 97 total. The number that would haunt him for the rest of his life. In a German field hospital, Klaus Richter woke with morphine dulling the pain in his shattered shoulder. He demanded paper and pen, wrote with his left hand while nurses tried to make him rest. The American ghost captain had me in perfect position at 40 yards, could have killed me easily. Chose shoulder shot instead. This is not just technology, this is philosophy. They have learned precision over maximum force, silence over noise.
Restraint over brutality. They choose when to kill and when to spare. We cannot match this thinking. We will lose not because their weapons are superior, but because they understand when not to use them. He signed the report, dated it November 19th. But Germany would surrender before he could send it up the chain of command. He kept the paper instead. Carried it home to Bavaria as a reminder that he had been beaten by better thinking, not just better equipment. In London, Leopold Ashford received the after-action report 3 days later. Read it in his workshop, surrounded by tools he would never use again. 97 confirmed kills, 2 American casualties. Mission success. His son's question had been answered with German blood and American innovation. He wept, not from pride, from the crushing weight of knowing that Owen's simple question had created a weapon that made killing almost too efficient. That answering one son's question had led to 97 fathers losing their sons. But he also understood those 97 deaths had saved American lives, had proven that sometimes the smartest weapon is the one nobody hears coming, had shown that silence could change how wars were fought. Nathaniel Brennan sat in the London debriefing room and listened to officers discuss expanding the sock method, talk about production, about training programs, about turning a 50-cent piece of wool into doctrine. And he thought about Matthias Hale's dying words. Too loud. The sock had solved that problem, had made his rifle quiet enough to kill sentries 40 yards from sleeping soldiers. But it had also made killing 97 men feel mechanical, efficient, almost easy. And Brennan understood that some solutions create problems the original question never anticipated. He had become very good at killing men who never heard him coming. Whether that was something to be proud of or ashamed of, would haunt him for the rest of his life. November 20th, 1944. The war room at OSS headquarters smelled like cigarette smoke and burnt coffee. Brennan stood at attention before a panel of British and American officers who held his future in their hands. His arm was still bandaged. His uniform still carried mud from Hurtgen Forest. He had not slept in 36 hours. Major Thornton read from the after-action report. His voice was steady, but Brennan could hear something underneath it, something like awe mixed with horror. 97 confirmed enemy casualties over 6 days. 0 friendly losses after day 4. Supply convoy destroyed. Command infrastructure disrupted across an entire sector. German forces convinced they were facing company-strength opposition when in fact it was 6 men with modified rifles. He looked up from the report. Captain Brennan, you have proven that the Ashford suppression method works in combat conditions. You have validated a technique that could fundamentally change how we conduct infiltration operations.
The British War Office is prepared to recommend immediate expansion of this program. Brennan waited for the other shoe to drop. There was always another shoe. A British colonel spoke, silver-haired, ribbons from the Great War across his chest. The kind of officer who had watched one generation die in trenches and now watched another generation die in forests. However, we have a problem. This technique is too simple, too easily replicated. If the Germans capture one of your rifles and examine it, they will understand immediately. A sock and an oil rag. Materials available to any soldier on any front. We would lose our tactical advantage within weeks. Another officer added his voice. American. Strategic Services. The kind of bureaucrat who thought in terms of advantage and leverage instead of lives saved or lost. There is also the question of post-war implications. A suppression method this effective in the hands of criminals, insurgents, or foreign intelligence services presents unacceptable security risks. The IRA could use this against British soldiers. Soviet agents could eliminate targets in Western cities. Criminal organizations could... Enough! Thornton's voice cut through the speculation.
Say what you mean to say. The British colonel folded his hands on the table. All weapons utilizing the Ashford suppression method are to be collected immediately. All documentation is to be classified beyond top secret. All field tests are to cease, and all evidence of this program is to be destroyed, effective immediately. The room went silent. Brennan thought about Leopold Ashford in his basement workshop, about a father who had sold everything to answer his dead son's question, about Owen Ashford, who had died asking why guns could not be quieter, about 97 German soldiers who had died because silence turned out to be more deadly than noise. "You are going to bury it," Brennan said quietly. "You are going to pretend it never existed." "We are going to ensure it does not fall into the wrong hands," the colonel corrected. "This is not about erasing your accomplishment, Captain. This is about maintaining operational security and preventing future misuse." "It is about politics," Brennan replied. "It is about being afraid of what you created, afraid that other people might be as good at killing silently as we were." The American officer's voice hardened. "Captain, you will surrender your weapon for destruction. You will sign documentation swearing you to secrecy regarding this program, and you will not discuss these methods with anyone lacking proper security clearance. Is that understood?" Brennan stood at attention. "Yes, sir." But he was already making a different decision, a choice that violated every regulation and oath and principle of military discipline. Because some things mattered more than following orders. Some truths deserved to be preserved, even when powerful men wanted them erased. That afternoon, Brennan visited Leopold Ashford's workshop for the last time. The old man was sitting at his workbench with Owen's photograph in his hands. He looked up when Brennan entered. Read the expression on the captain's face without needing explanation. "They are destroying it," Ashford said. Statement, not question. "All of it. Orders came down this morning. Every weapon, every document, every shred of evidence that this program existed." Ashford set down the photograph with careful precision. When he spoke, his voice was hollow. "My son asked a question. I spent a year answering it, sold everything I owned, crossed an ocean, built something that worked, proved it saved lives, and now they will burn it all and pretend Owen never asked anything at all." Brennan reached into his duffel bag, pulled out his M1 Garand, with the olive-drab sock still stretched over the muzzle. The wool was burned through in places, stained dark with powder residue and blood and 6 days of silent killing. But it was intact, functional, a piece of history that powerful men wanted to erase. He placed it on Ashford's workbench. "I am supposed to surrender this for destruction, but I am not going to do that. I am going to take it home, hide it, preserve it, and someday, when enough time has passed, someone will find it and understand what it meant. That your son's question was answered, that his death led to something that mattered." Ashford touched the rifle, ran his fingers over the sock. Tears rolled down his weathered face. "They will court-martial you if they discover this. Treason. Theft of military property. You could spend years in prison." "Then they had better not discover it." Brennan pulled out a second item. A journal he had kept during the 6 days. Detailed entries for every kill, every shot, every moment of silence that had saved American lives or ended German ones. He placed it beside the rifle. "This is the truth, Mr. Ashford. 97 entries. 97 men who died because your invention worked. Because your son asked the right question and you had the courage to answer it. This truth deserves to exist even if governments want it buried." Ashford broke down completely, sobbed like a man whose grief had finally found an outlet. Brennan stood beside him, placed a hand on the old man's shoulder. Let him cry for Owen, for 97 Germans,
for the weapon that would be erased, for all the sons who died asking questions that fathers could not answer. When Ashford finally composed himself, he spoke in a whisper. "Thank you for honouring him,
for making sure his question was not asked in vain." Brennan picked up the rifle and journal, wrapped them in oilcloth, sealed them in his duffel with the care of a man preserving something sacred. "I will keep them safe, I promise you that." He walked out of Ashford's workshop, knowing he would never see the old man again, would never know what happened to the civilian inventor who had tried to make his son's death mean something. But he carried Leopold Ashford's grief with him. Carried it home to America. Carried it into the attic where truth would wait 65 years for someone to find it. The military collected all the sock-wrapped rifles the next day. British engineers set up cutting torches in the OSS Armory courtyard. One by one they fed the weapons into the flames. Metal glowed red, wood caught fire, and the evidence of Leopold Ashford's innovation turned to slag and ash. But one rifle had already disappeared. Smuggled home in a duffel bag by a captain who understood that some truths were too important to destroy. June 7th, 1945, Boston Harbor. The troop ship docked at noon on a day so bright it hurt to look at the sky. Brennan stood at the rail and watched America materialize through the heat shimmer. Buildings, docks, people waiting for soldiers to come home. The war in Europe had ended 4 weeks ago. Germany had surrendered unconditionally. The killing had stopped. And now the survivors were coming home to try and remember what peace felt like. Brennan was 33 years old. He had left Boston in 1942 as a civil engineer who designed bridges. He was returning as something else, something harder, something that had learned to kill 97 men without making enough noise to wake sleeping soldiers. He carried one duffel bag. Inside it, wrapped in oilcloth and buried beneath civilian clothes, was an M1 Garand rifle with an olive-drab sock stretched over its muzzle. Beatrice was waiting at the dock, 29 years old, with dark hair pinned up and green eyes that had lived 3 years of their own war, working in factories, rationing everything, wondering every day if the telegram would come, if some officer would knock on the door with folded flags and practice condolences. She saw him at the rail. Their eyes met across 100 yards of dock and water, and Brennan understood that you could survive a war and still lose something essential. Could come home and discover that the man who left was not the man who returned. They met at the bottom of the gangway, embraced, held each other while around them other reunions played out in tears and laughter and the desperate relief of survival. Beatrice pulled back, studied his face, touched the lines around his eyes that had not been there 3 years ago. "You are different," she said quietly. "Thinner, harder, older than 3 years should make you. I am sorry. Do not apologize for surviving. Just tell me you are really here, that you really came back. I am here. I am home, and I am never leaving you again." But that night, in their small apartment in South Boston, Brennan could not sleep, could not close his eyes without seeing faces. 26 sentries, 68 convoy guards, 2 final kills, officers and sergeants and young soldiers who had died without ever hearing the weapon that ended them. At 3 in the morning, he got up, retrieved the duffel bag from the closet, unwrapped the rifle, sat at the kitchen table with it across his lap, while moonlight came through the window and made shadows on the wall. Beatrice found him there an hour later. She stood in the doorway in her nightgown and studied the weapon he had smuggled home, studied the burned sock, the worn stock, the careful maintenance that spoke of obsessive preservation. "What is it?" she asked. So Brennan told her. Everything. The mission that killed 11 men because a rifle was too loud. Leopold Ashford and his dead son's question. The sock that reduced gunfire to barely audible. 6 days in Hurtgen Forest. 97 silent kills. The government order to destroy all evidence. His decision to smuggle one rifle home as proof that the truth had existed. When he finished, Beatrice sat beside him, touched the rifle, felt the weight of history in cold metal and burned wool. "Why did you keep it? Why risk prison to preserve a weapon?" "Because 97 men died," Brennan said. "Because Leopold Ashford's son asked a question that deserved an answer. Because Matthias Hale died, saying it was too loud. Because somewhere between all that death and silence there is a truth that governments want to bury but should not be forgotten." Beatrice was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood and walked to the hallway closet, came back with a wooden trunk. "Then we hide it where no one will find it until the time is right. Until someone can understand what it means without using it for the wrong reasons." They carried the trunk to the attic together, placed the rifle inside wrapped in oilcloth, added the journal with its 97 entries. Brennan wrote a final letter on OSS stationery, sealed it with the journal. If anyone discovers this, know that men died silently because of this weapon. I kept it so history would remember, so Leopold Ashford's son would not be forgotten. So future generations would understand that sometimes the deadliest weapons are the ones nobody hears coming, and so they would understand the weight of making killing too easy, the moral burden of precision, the cost of being the one nobody notices until it is already too late. He signed it, dated it,
placed it in the trunk with the rifle and journal. Then they closed the lid, buckled the leather strap, and left Truth to wait in darkness for someone to find it. Nathaniel Brennan tried to build a normal life. He returned to civil engineering, designed bridges across New England, structures that connected communities instead of destroying them. He and Beatrice had 2 children, a son named Malcolm, who became a teacher, a daughter named Grace, who became a doctor.
He never spoke about the war, never mentioned Hurtgen Forest or silent killings or the weapon hidden in his attic. At family dinners, when Malcolm or Grace asked about his service, Beatrice would change the subject and Brennan would sit quiet and distant, present but unreachable. The nightmares never stopped. 3 nights a week, sometimes more, he would wake up gasping, seeing Matthias Hale die, seeing 26 sentries fall without sound, seeing the German captain through his rifle sights, feeling his finger on the trigger and making the choice to wound instead of kill. He found what peace he could in construction. Every bridge he designed was an act of penance. Every structure that carried traffic over water or valleys or railroad tracks was proof that he could build instead of destroy, create instead of eliminate. He made peace with his 97 kills the only way he could, by believing that each silent death had saved American lives, that every German who died without raising an alarm meant a dozen American soldiers who lived to see another day. That silence had been mercy compared to the alternative. It was not perfect peace, but it was enough. Malcolm Brennan had a son in 1982, named him Elias after Nathaniel's father, Ezra. The family line continued, and in the attic above them, all the rifle waited. Nathaniel Brennan died on August 12, 2009. Heart failure, surrounded by family, 97 years old, the same number as his confirmed kills 65 years earlier. His last hours were morphine soft, drifting in and out of consciousness, seeing faces from a war that had ended before his grandchildren were born. Matthias Hale, Leopold Ashford, Klaus Richter, 97 German soldiers who had died without hearing death arrive. Elias sat beside the hospital bed. 27 years old, Army Ranger, home on leave between deployments. He held his grandfather's hand and watched the old man's eyes track movement that was not there, watched him fight battles that had ended decades ago. At the very end, Nathaniel's eyes cleared, focused. He gripped Elias's hand with surprising strength. "The attic," he whispered. "Remember to check the attic." Then he was gone, and Elias Brennan made a promise he did not understand.
A promise that would wait 3 months until rain drummed on a roof and dust settled on old cardboard boxes and truth emerged from darkness. The Imperial War Museum in London received Elias's email on a Thursday in April 2010. The curator was a woman named Margaret Sheffield, 62 years old, a historian who had spent 4 decades studying unconventional warfare in World War II. She read the email twice, looked at the attached photographs 3 times. Then she picked up her phone and called every expert she knew. The photographs showed an M1 Garand rifle with an olive drab wool sock stretched over the muzzle, a journal filled with precise entries documenting 97 kills, and a letter signed by Captain Nathaniel Brennan explaining why he had smuggled a weapon home in violation of direct orders. Sheffield flew to Boston the next week, sat in Elias Brennan's living room and examined the rifle with hands that trembled slightly. She had read classified reports about suppression experiments in 1944, had seen references to an unnamed program that had been terminated for security reasons, but no physical evidence had survived, until now. "This is extraordinary," she said. "We thought all examples of the Ashford suppression method were destroyed. Your grandfather's rifle may be the only survivor." "The Ashford method?" Elias asked. Sheffield opened her briefcase, pulled out declassified documents that had been released just 6 weeks earlier, documents that had remained classified for 65 years. In November 1944, a civilian inventor named Leopold Ashford developed a simple suppression technique using wool socks and oil-soaked rags. British SOE conducted field tests in Hurtgen Forest. The results were remarkable. 97 confirmed enemy casualties in 6 days with minimal friendly losses. But the program was terminated and all evidence ordered destroyed for security reasons. She spread the documents across the coffee table. "Or so we thought. These documents were declassified in February. They reveal something the government kept secret for 65 years. Elias leaned forward, read the first document. British War Office memorandum dated June 1945. 12 Ashford suppression rifles to be retained for specialized intelligence operations.
Not to be destroyed per general order.
Classified beyond top secret. To be used by MI6 for high-priority target elimination until superior technology becomes available. The second document was dated 1963, nearly 20 years later. Ashford methods still in active use, deployed in Malaya, counterinsurgency, Northern Ireland reconnaissance. Middle East intelligence operations. Recommend continued classification. The third document was dated 1982.
Final Ashford method rifle decommissioned, replaced by modern suppressor technology, all physical evidence to be destroyed. Records to remain classified indefinitely. Elias looked up at Sheffield. They lied. They ordered everyone to destroy their rifles. Then they kept 12 for themselves and used them for 40 years. Yes, while telling the world the method did not work, while erasing Leopold Ashford from history, while pretending the program had been a failure.
She picked up Nathaniel's journal, opened it to a random page. November 16th. Killed a German captain at 60 yards. He was drinking coffee. Died so quietly that the officers inside the bunker never stopped their meeting. I think about him sometimes. Wonder if he had children. If they waited for him to come home. If they understand why he never did.
Your grandfather kept the truth alive, Sheffield said. He preserved evidence that governments wanted erased.
And now, 65 years later, the world can finally understand what really happened. 6 months later, the Imperial War Museum opened a new exhibit, the weapon too effective to exist. Elias stood at the opening ceremony in his dress uniform, medals on his chest from 2 tours in Afghanistan, his grandmother Beatrice beside him in her wheelchair, 94 years old and sharp as ever, as before them, displayed in a temperature-controlled case, was Nathaniel Brennan's M1 Garand, with its olive-drab sock still stretched over the muzzle. The journal lay open beside it, the letter explaining why he had smuggled it home, and the declassified documents proving the British government had secretly used the method for 40 years. The exhibit explained everything: the physics of subsonic suppression, the tactical applications, the field test results. But it also told the human story. Leopold Ashford and his son Owen, Nathaniel Brennan, and 97 silent kills. The government cover-up and the truth preserved in an attic for 65 years. Elias gave a speech to the assembled historians and veterans and journalists. His voice was steady despite the emotion. My grandfather never spoke about the war, never told us what he had done or why he kept this weapon, but he carried the weight of 97 kills for 65 years, carried the guilt of making death too easy, carried the knowledge that he had helped create something that changed warfare. He paused, looked at the rifle in its case. He smuggled this home at great personal risk because he believed some truths are too important to erase, because Leopold Ashford's son asked a question that deserved to be remembered, because 97 German soldiers died without hearing death coming, and that fact should not be forgotten. Another pause, longer this time. But he also kept it as a warning, as proof that innovation can make killing too efficient, that silence can make death too easy, that we must always remember the weight of what we create and the cost of what we use. The exhibit became one of the museum's most popular displays. Veterans brought their grandchildren. Military historians wrote papers. Special operations units sent instructors to study the technique that had been classified for 65 years. And in a small cemetery in Bavaria, Klaus Richter's grandson placed flowers on a grave. He had found his grandfather's final report in a box of belongings. The report Richter had written with his left hand while recovering from a shoulder wound. The American Ghost team leader could have killed me. Chose not to. This is philosophy as much as technology. They won because they thought differently about when to use force, about restraint and precision, about silence over noise. The grandson read those words and understood that his grandfather had been beaten by a better idea, not just better weapons. Elias visited Arlington National Cemetery on November the 19th, 2010. He walked through Section 60 until he found the simple headstone. Captain Nathaniel Brennan, U.S. Army Office of Strategic Services, 1912 to 2009. Beloved husband, father, grandfather, engineer of bridges, and keeper of truths. He placed a photograph on the grass. The museum exhibit, the rifle in its case, the journal open to the first entry, the declassified documents proving everything his grandfather had preserved. You were right to keep it, Grandpa. Now everyone knows.
Now the world understands what you did, what Mr. Ashford created, what Owen asked. He stood at attention, saluted, felt the weight of generational connection. His grandfather had carried an M1 Garand with a sock over the muzzle, had killed 97 men in 6 days without raising alarms, had smuggled truth home and hidden it for 65 years. Elias carried an M4 carbine with a modern suppressor, used subsonic ammunition, conducted silent operations in Afghanistan. Every technique his grandfather had proven in Hurtgen Forest lived on in evolved form. The legacy whispered across generations, from fathers to sons to grandsons, a continuous line of men who understood that sometimes the smartest weapons are the ones nobody hears coming.
"I carry your legacy every day," Elias said quietly. "Every time I chamber a subsonic round, every time my suppressor keeps me hidden, every time silence keeps me alive. Thank you for showing us the way." He walked away, knowing that the story was complete, that the truth had been told, that Leopold Ashford's son's question had been answered and preserved and honored. At the museum, visitors studied the olive drab sock with reverence, read the technical specifications, the mission reports, the letter explaining why silence mattered more than noise, and slowly understanding spread. This was not just about a weapon. It was about innovation born from grief, about a father trying to honor his dead son, about a soldier trying to save his men, about the moral complexity of making killing easier while making war more precise. A Navy SEAL instructor stood before the exhibit with his students, pointed at the sock-wrapped rifle. This is where modern silent warfare began. The men who carried this had no manuals, no doctrine. They proved it in combat through skill and courage. He paused, made sure every student was listening. When you trust your suppressor, remember Leopold Ashford, who built this to honor his son Owen. Remember Captain Brennan, who proved it worked. Remember that innovation and restraint matter as much as firepower. The students studied the sock, the journal, the declassified documents, and they understood they were looking at the ancestor of every modern suppression system. In the display beside the rifle, a small plaque bore Leopold Ashford's son's final question. "Dad, you made still silent in Kentucky. Why can nobody make guns quieter?" Beneath it, the answer written in Nathaniel Brennan's hand. Because no one tried hard enough. Because no one was motivated by love and loss and desperate hope. Until Owen asked, until Leopold answered. Until 97 men died, proving that a 50-cent sock could change how wars are fought. The exhibit would run for years, would travel to Washington and Boston and Kentucky, would teach generations about innovation and sacrifice and the weight of making death efficient. But the most important lesson was simpler, written in Brennan's final journal entry. Dated November 19th, 1944. 97 confirmed kills. God help me, I became very good at killing men who never heard me coming. But I also learned when not to kill, when mercy meant more than another body, when restraint proved strength instead of weakness. That choice, that moment of deciding not to fire the killing shot, may be the only thing that kept me human through all this death. The weapon that looked like a mistake had earned its place in history, not through official channels or government recognition, but through the stubborn persistence of men who believed some truths were too important to forget. Leopold Ashford had answered his son's question with a sock. Nathaniel Brennan had proven it worked with 97 kills. Elias Brennan had found it in an attic and given it to the world. And somewhere in that chain of fathers and sons and grandsons, a simple truth emerged. Sometimes the most powerful weapons are the ones that cost nothing and whisper instead of scream. Sometimes the deadliest force on a battlefield is the one nobody hears coming. And sometimes the bravest thing a soldier can do is choose not to fire when he has a perfect shot. The rifle rests in its case now, silent, preserved, teaching lessons to anyone willing to listen, about innovation and grief, about silence and death, about the weight of 97 kills and the choice to make the 98th shot non-lethal. About a father's question and a soldier's answer and a grandson's discovery. About truth that governments tried to bury but could not destroy. The men who built it are gone. The men who carried it are mostly gone. But the weapon remains, whispering its story to anyone willing to hear.